Let me just put my microphone on here. How's that? Is this thing on? No, not on? All that? I am good.
Yeah, this is for video.
Oh, this is for video. Got it, okay. All right, we're now starting. We are taking an RV that has been converted into a karaoke lounge across the country to meet with communities like this to show how this entrepreneurial movement is actually transforming what it means to work, what the future of work looks like. And we're going to invite people onto our RV and have them sing their favorite karaoke song. And we're going to put them on video talking about the kinds of projects they're working on and the way that they're doing it. Because what we're finding is that while these ideas are common, these are approaches that are transformative everywhere, they have a local flavor. And so that's what I'm excited to experience today. So, but the subject of my talk today is how great entrepreneurs make their own luck. Now, I'll talk about why I can say this with a straight face. Make your own luck, it sounds to some people kind of ridiculous, even though Thomas Jefferson, resident of the great state of Virginia, once said, I believe in luck, and I find that the harder I work, the more of it I have. And we do find that, but there's more to the story than that. And I wanted to start with a little story of my own. This is the story of my own kind of weekend project. So when I look around and I see you all working on projects with pretty big range, actually. I was really excited to see a MakerBot over here and physical contraptions being made, because oftentimes you see a bunch of people heads down coding, and this is a wider variety. That is good news, based on the evidence that I'll put before you. I had a little concept about, 7 years ago, and it was based on this observation I had that I live in Silicon Valley, right? I go to parties sometimes and people will give out swag, Valley swag, tech swag. Kind of like, let's see, some of you have tech swag on. Well, actually a lot of you. Somebody here, can you stand up? Start Norfolk swag. That's some beautiful swag. And we'd find as we'd wear the swag and we'd get pictures taken of us, and these pictures would end up on Flickr. And our friends in New Orleans or in Des Moines or halfway around the world, they'd say, where the hell did you get that beautiful swag? I want me some of that. And we thought it was kind of funny, because it is kind of funny. I mean, you want this free giveaway t-shirt.
Zombie tag.
Oh, zombie tag. Now that's some sweet swag. People all around the world wanted this stuff. So we thought, how funny would it be to take the free swag and sell it? But not just sell it, do it as a monthly subscription service. And this became this idea that we would joke about for about a month called Valley Swag. And finally, I really didn't have any time to do it, but my sister was having a baby. I sat in the waiting room, nothing to do, and I just decided to hack it up. I put up an e-commerce page. One single page was marketing and buy button, right? Thanks to PayPal. And literally an hour before I was going to send out the first email, my friend who was a journalist at Valley Wag, who was looking around for alternative URLs for the company, he discovered it, and he posted a blog post about it before I was even ready. And I started seeing these orders come in. This was crazy, right? It was a joke, and I was already getting orders. Within 2 months, we had over 2,000 subscribers who wanted us to be sending them every month t-shirts, pins, stickers, hats, anything with a logo on it. Now, so this was great news on the one hand. I'd never seen so much money in my PayPal account, and it just would come every month. That was the good news. Bad news is e-commerce is hard. Why is it hard? Well, first of all, finding free swag that people actually wanted to wear. Like AOL, Microsoft, they have plenty of shirts. But cool companies, they're not spending their money on swag. So that was problem number one. Problem number two was fulfillment is hard. And here you see my wife, who I somehow got to fill up bags of the swag. You can see her, look at her expression. She's pissed off. Our relationship is still successful, I'm happy to say. But that wasn't actually the hardest thing. The hardest thing was customer service. And so as successful as we were, and our customers loved it so much, they'd post pictures of their swag as they received it, and that's how we spread. I mean, we didn't spend a dime on marketing. This is the kind of pattern in social commerce these days. It kind of takes on a life of its own, and we ended up taking the glamour shots with the team, and it was really exciting. And for a while, we thought this was going to be an actual business for us. But at a certain point, we realized that the economics didn't work. And yet, there was something we discovered in this experience. Right? We thought we were on the road to one thing, an accidental success around e-commerce swag. In fact, what we had discovered was something completely different that we didn't know to look for, which was that customer service was not only hard, but it was in the process of being changed. It was being changed because all of a sudden, customers could talk to each other openly on the internet. They were doing it on our blog. While we were scrambling to get them answers via email, they were answering each other in the comment section of our blog. And we would answer them in the comment section of the blog. And instead of answering over and over again, you'd answer once, and all these people would see it. So this was our aha moment, and we ended up starting a company called Get Satisfaction, which when we first started pitching it to investors back in 2007, they thought we were crazy. Right? Why would companies want to air their dirty laundry? Why would they do customer service in public like we were proposing? Only big companies and gaming companies could have a customer community where customers can talk to each other. You need millions of people, don't you? We said, no, it's changing, it's changing. And we were eventually right, but it took a while. The moral of the story, and today, Get Satisfaction has over 65,000 customer communities. It's being used in over 25 different languages, and it's on its way to being a huge success. But the reason we were successful was not because we set out to create a customer service company. We knew nothing about customer service. We didn't know that much about what a social business was, even though we'd been on social networks for a while. I mean, nobody really did. So when we started to look at this, my partner and I, co-founder of Get Satisfaction and the guy who eventually became the co-author of my book, we started asking ourselves and then hundreds of other entrepreneurs and our friends who worked in big companies and small companies, what makes up a success? First answer is, well, you work really, really hard. You keep going when it's when things look bleakest, and you have to have good process, and you have to have focus, and all the things that you normally hear. But when we dug a little deeper, what we found was something that really struck a chord, and that was the things that mattered the most were the things that were often the least predictable, the things that couldn't have been expected. There's a word, serendipity, that we often use, especially those of us who make social software. We talk about creating serendipitous moments where people can find something they weren't looking for. And serendipity is a really powerful word. It's been around for only 200 years. It was coined by this British aristocrat, Horace Walpole, who had noticed that there was actually a faculty, a skill, involved in taking a chance discovery and doing something with it, and connecting the dots between that chance moment, that chance introduction or event or information, and the aha, right? The thing which actually sets you on a new course. And he coined this word serendipity. Looking for one thing, finding another, okay? It doesn't mean magic, pixie dust, unicorns, coincidence. It doesn't mean synchronicity, which has metaphysical overtones. Serendipity is a practical word, okay? Scientists have been talking about serendipity a lot over the last 100 years because scientists know the importance of this. When you're looking for, let's say, a heart medication and you discover an anti-impotence pill. Right? Pharmacology actually has created entire processes, systems around looking for the things they weren't looking for. Because this has so often been a key ingredient behind blockbuster drugs. Artists also have for a long time known the power of serendipity. Picasso, this may be apocryphal, but it's a great story nonetheless. we're all familiar with Picasso's blue period, one of his key periods in his artistic canon. Apparently, he went to paint one day and he realized all he had was blue paint. Now, a mediocre painter, even a good painter, would have said, I'm not painting until I get me some new paint. Picasso, Picasso looked at this as an opportunity. We can look at this as the power of constraints. And lots of people, like Ev Williams of Twitter, have talked about the power of a constraint, so say 140 characters, to open up creativity. And this is certainly what happened with Picasso, who found that by chance he only had blue and started to paint blue paintings. So science, art, these are two fields which have embraced the notion of chance and of serendipity in particular. But business is an area where we so often struggle with this concept. And I find this when I talk about this or when I write about it online, there's always a few people who, let's call them hecklers, who say this is ridiculous. You can't control your luck. You can't, I agree that luck happens, but it's not important to talk about because what's really important is hard work, planning, and strategy. So I would agree that 95% of our time, I made that number up, it could be 92%, 93.5%, but a lot of our time is spent on the grueling, predictable, process-driven stuff, okay? There's no way of getting around that. But the magic, the practical magic, happens around those things which we couldn't expect. It happens around this idea of serendipity. The problem, so here's the good news. The good news is, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're somebody working on an early stage project, particularly where there are a lot of components about it that you don't know. You don't know whether your current version of it is going to work. You don't know if your concept will actually be appealing to other people. You don't know if it'll be addictive, you don't know how it will spread, all of these things, right? This is the excitement of starting a new thing. The problem is success. The problem is, as soon as we start to get product market fit, as soon as we start to get some validation of our strategy, we find it harder and harder to make room for the things that we didn't expect. Right? We start to focus on our plans. We start to make commitments around what we know to be true, what we think we know to be true. And this starts to take up more and more of our time. This is a good thing on the one hand. Right? If you're able to bring investors in, they expect you to have a plan and hit those numbers. You have employees, they expect you to have money in the bank to pay them. So predictability is a good thing. But if it ultimately leads to our own obsolescence because we were not able to adapt to new information, to the unexpected changes in the market, to the unexpected competitor who changes everything with a new product release, then that predictability ends up being our own undoing. So we call this the double bind. The double bind is actually a term in psychology. It means basically when an authority figure gives you two commands, and those two commands are actually incompatible. They're contradictory. We have them all over the place in our lives and in our business. In business, a good example of a double bind would be hit your quarterly numbers, don't rock the boat, be predictable, right? Do what we told you, but also be adaptive, be innovative, come up with new ideas, surprise us. Right? This, in the age where everybody has an innovation technique in mind, all the great managers, they have some idea of how they're going to do innovation. This kind of double bind, this specific double bind, is really prevalent. And so in our book and in our research, we found that the companies that have, and the entrepreneurs that have solved this problem, they've actually embraced an alternative paradox, which is the idea of what we call planned serendipity. Planned serendipity is using the planning mechanism. Companies are planning machines, right? So how do you harness the planning mechanism of a business to open up space, to allow people to be their most curious selves, even as they're nailing those goals that they have that align with the company's vision. That's the idea of planned serendipity. It's not that we know exactly what's going to happen, it's that we can create the conditions and we can create the mental preparedness to be ready when those opportunities emerge. So, I just talked about the double blind. I'm going to stop here, actually, before I go into sort of a larger story that opens up some of these skills of planned serendipity. We've actually found that it's not just a vague idea. These are actually practical skills which allow individuals and organizations to continue to be open as they go from the entrepreneurial stage, which tends to be ripe with. So it tends to be intuitive for people to use these to the organizational challenges as you scale that I just described. I wanted to ask, and I think we've got a few book rewards for those who are gutsy enough to stand up. I wanted to actually just use you as guinea pigs for a few moments and ask, what serendipity, what chance event brought you to start Norfolk, to this event today? I'll tell you mine first, and then if I could hear just a few of you. I just want to give you an example of how common, how ubiquitous these chance events that are key moments are. So for me, let's see here. Claude, where are you? Okay, this is Claude, ladies and gentlemen. He worked with us at Get Satisfaction in San Francisco, and then moved out here, and I think is one of the social scene of the organizers of this conference, and he recommended that the team talk to me, and it's something like that, right? Yeah, and I entered into an email exchange, and pretty soon I was on a plane to Norfolk. It was something I was interested in, but I wasn't seeking it out. Okay, so a relationship led to an unexpected opportunity for me. So that's my story. Can I hear it? Yeah, we've got some hands over here.
How I came to start Norfolk is that I'm part of the Geekettes Club of Southampton Roads, and at our meeting that we had this past Wednesday, we had the opportunity to pitch our business ideas to win a ticket to start Norfolk. So I was one of the lucky ones selected, one of 10, and here I am today.
Congratulations, that sounds great. That's your free book.
Thank you.
Where you going? Yeah.
I was looking in the Virginia Pilot, the actual newspaper, the actual paper version.
You still have that? Congratulations.
And I was looking in the one ads, and I didn't really like anything there, and then I saw this little tiny ad for Start Norfolk. I'm like, what is this business? So I started looking at that, and then I was like, hey, let's go check this thing out. Last year, about 6-7 months ago, and then after that, I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna do this.
That's great. Yeah, newspapers, information channels, they're a great way to luck into information that changes the course of your life. Let's see here. And the great thing about newspapers, especially the print versions, is that you don't have the filter bubble that you do have with online versions, right? Where the filter thinks they know what you need to see. Newspapers, they don't know, and you end up tripping over things which are even more surprising.
Hi, so I was having dinner with a friend 11 p.m. Thursday night, and they said, Jill, what are you doing over the weekend? And I said, well, I'm taking a wellness blessing class. And they said, oh, you need to go to Start Norfolk. Because earlier I was telling him, you know what, I just got this idea about matching healers with patients. And I always get people asking me, hey, what do I do? I have this problem, how do I do it? And I spend hours telling them who to seek and how to do it. And I said, well, if I could have an app or a website where I can do that, because I've been doing traveling, I've been in the travel industry for years. People, when they want travel deals, they ask me, and I say, go to my app, go to my website, and I said, that's what I want to do. I don't want to spend 4 hours telling my friends, try Reiki, try hypnotherapy, get a relationship coach. I just wanted to tell them, hey, get the app. It's bothering me. So.
That's a great story. All right, one more. Let's see here. All right, here we go.
The immediate connection is I got a Twitter message from a friend of mine to review a pitch, and then brought it over to Start Norfolk. But I think it goes back even further with meeting Brendan Dunn, We Are Titans, and joining the community, the programming community in this area. So as that grew, this grew, that's how I ended up here.
Little seeds get planted, unexpected sources, and big things bloom. That is the pattern. Now, you can't be prescriptive about this. This is a pattern. This is a set of provocations for us in our lives that should allow us to think differently about the role of plans and the role of the unexpected. I want to tell you one of my favorite stories about Jane, whose last name has so many consonants next to each other, I can't pronounce it. It's an Irish name. And she started a company called Sugru. How many here know about Sugru? Okay, just a few of you. Sugru is an amazing story and an amazing company. She is an Irish woman who is a sculptor. Okay, came from about as far away from the tech scene as you could possibly imagine. And she started this company which, in brief, makes a kind of wonder rubber, a space-age rubber that is also sticky. It's an adhesive. Think about a cross between silly putty and duct tape. So you can form it into shapes and stick it to all kinds of surfaces. Their tagline is "Hack things better." It looks a little like that before you mold it, and looks a little like that after you've hacked your a more ergonomic grip to your tools. It's an amazing substance, and it's now used all around the world. So all 7 continents, over 100 countries, people in 100 countries use this, and it's gathering steam. Only 2 years old. And her story is a serendipity story. I'm going to walk through some of the components of her story and extrapolate some of the lessons that we can take. Now, I only have so much time today, but just to put a fine point on it, all of these skills of planned serendipity, they're practical. They're things which can affect your culture, should affect your culture, but also can be turned into actual structures, activities that you use in your business to continue or amplify those skills. So the first is preparation. Now, preparation, Louis Pasteur once said, as you probably know, that chance favors the prepared mind. And he said this to a group of incoming students to his college. But what did he mean? What should we take from that now, 120 years later? What is preparation? So for Jane, what preparation was being an oddball, which caused her to think differently. It required her to think differently because the environment that she was in wasn't designed for her. So going back to the beginning of the decade, 2000s, and she was a sculptor, but thought that she needed a more practical career skill. So she went back to school, Royal College of London, and decided to become a designer. Okay. Now, if you're a designer, you know that designing is about solving is about solving problems, right? It's about coming up with elegant solutions to complex problems that, whether that's in the communication field or in the product design field, but it's about taking very fuzzy things and making them very concise. Jane, being a sculptor, found that she was really struggling with this, right? She was used to abstracting things. And what at first seemed like a huge problem for her success in college, she ended up making it a huge benefit. She was able to take, even though she was going through these classes which were difficult for her, she was driven by her background in sculpture to find new ways to apply that background inside this environment. Now, so when we talk about preparation, what we found over and over again is that there are 3 components to prepared mind, to being able to see things differently than others do. First, it's about having an obsessive curiosity in an area of interest. Okay, this is not necessarily having just an obsession with an outcome. I need to get rich, I need to hit this goal. This is about having an interest for its own sake. And the reason why this is important is because it gives you a different lens on the things that you engage with. For her background in sculpture, her tactility and shape allowed her to look at things differently. So she would spend time in the workshop, and I'll get to in a moment, and this curiosity around shape and tactility really drove her. Secondly, the prepared mind, or what we call the geek mind, the geek brain, is in part because of this obsession, is able to arrest exceptions. And it's a funny phrase. The reason is because I stole it from Charles Darwin's son. To arrest an exception means to find an anomaly and not let it go. Okay? It's being able to see things which don't fit, right? So much of our time is about, in business is about finding things that fit. But the geek brain looks for things that don't quite fit. And so the third area is that the people who have a geek brain are prepared, are able to forget what they know to be true. This is about giving up on the conventional wisdom at just the right times. So this is the workshop that Jane would do her work in. The second skill is motion, right? So for Jane, it wasn't enough, and for many people, it's not enough simply to have this kind of curiosity. It's about having the space to play, the space to explore, given that lens. If you're spending all of your time dedicated to a very narrowly defined outcome, you don't necessarily have the room to make those connections. So in her case, in Jane's case, she had this workshop at the college. And in the workshop, it was the one time when she wasn't in these classes focused on very defined problems. She found herself, and this is the language she used, she found herself. She was almost driven inexorably towards this, just breaking things apart and putting them back together. And with the ingredients, with the materials around her. One of these materials was a silicone-based rubber, and she was taking sawdust, and she was pushing it into the silicone rubber, and then making them into bouncing balls. And she just found it interesting that she could take something that looked like wood, she had made it look like wood, and it had this property which was completely different than any wood. It bounced. That was exciting to her, and she started playing with that more and more, right? And this was not something that would have been predicted. She was basically, before she realized it, she was getting into material science. And so she found herself, on one hand, driven by this pure curiosity. On the other hand, as it became more and more interesting, she started thinking of uses for it. And this is her sketchbook. What was the purpose for this rubber? How could this be useful? And she struggled over this for weeks, months, until one day her boyfriend pointed out something. He pointed out that she was using it almost absentmindedly to change the shape of things in the house, to repair things around the house, like a leaky faucet or a knife where the handle was too small. And she said, "Oh my God, I've been missing it." So at this point, I want to introduce the third skill. The third skill is commitment. Okay, Jane had a very strong opinion about something, and that was she thought it was stupid that people would throw away stuff when they would break but could be easily repaired. She felt like people should work a little harder to make more use of the things in their lives, the physical objects. So she herself naturally found herself doing this. Okay, so this sense of commitment to a cause, to her own purpose. It didn't matter really what the purpose was, but she had one, and that allowed her to see things a little differently, to both act differently and hence see things when they emerged. And this is a pattern that we see over and over again, is that people who have a strong sense of purpose, they trip over unexpected opportunities, in part because they're going in that direction, but in part because they're able to see them. There are two parts to commitment. One part is a sense of purpose, right? This is that higher purpose that I think you guys heard a little bit about yesterday, right? Not all things are equal. Making money for its own sake is not as valuable as doing something which engages you in here, right? It doesn't have to be something that other people think are important, but if it engages you in here, you will work harder and you will see things differently than you would otherwise. Of course, having a purpose is only so valuable as your ability to stick to it, right? So this is the second ingredient to commitment, stick-to-itness. To explain why stick-to-itness is so important, we have to go to science again. And with science, over the last few years, we've seen just incredible leaps forward in terms of behavioral psychology and our understanding of how our own brains trick us. So one of those areas is our sense of our own willpower, right? We think we've got an equal level of willpower all across the day, but in fact, the degree to which we have willpower is highly dependent on how many other decisions we've been making. Imagine a fuel gauge. You have just so much willpower. You use it up with each successive decision. So if you're planning a wedding and you're being asked over and over again what your opinion is on what flower arrangements or what to put on your bridal registry, by the end, if you've been through this process, you'll know what I'm talking about. By the end of it, enough already. I don't care. Whatever my wife says. Okay? Or you just say, I'll take the one on the left. I don't, various ways. Maybe it's the husband thing, I don't know. But there are various ways where this lack of willpower, this drained willpower thing comes through. By the way, there is one way that we know to combat this, in addition to just making fewer decisions, and that is glucose. Increasing your glucose intake at various strategic moments, but not fructose, because fructose is associated now with cancer and heart disease. This is what it means to live in the future, folks. It's very hard. But stick-to-itness is a key ingredient to this willpower problem, right? Because what it means to have purpose combined with stick-to-itness is you're actually reducing your decisions. Okay, it actually helps to prefabricate those things you can say no to or have to say no to. And this may seem strange, we're talking about serendipity, which is about taking unplanned paths, but a success condition in businesses as they grow for taking unplanned paths is actually being able to say no to many of those paths. So this is what it means to have commitment, and Jane had an incredible amount of it. Problem was that this rubber that she had made in class, in the workshop, it didn't actually work very well. It was a good prototype, but it didn't stick to enough surfaces. It had expired. It lost its effects after a few weeks. It really wasn't ready for prime time. But this didn't stop her. Okay, and this is a key lesson. I think many of you know it innately. But she started talking to everybody she could about this. She showed it at the school demo day. She called people that she knew who were more in the sciences. And pretty soon, she had a lot of interest in this. Her vision was so strong. And she didn't care, by the way. She didn't care about people stealing her idea. That wasn't what was driving her. What was driving her was seeing this vision to reality, to success. So she was able to get out in front of it in a way that somebody who was hoarding their idea, they wouldn't show it to anybody without an NDA, was able to. And this is the board that she showed at the demo day at her school. What she found was that the upside of being public about her vision was incredible. Not only did she end up with an advisory board of scientists and people in business, which she knew nothing about, she also ended up winning an award, £35,000 grant to develop this into a more commercial prototype. Well, she was excited, this was great, until she started to understand what it was going to take to build this prototype, and what it was going to take to do the lab experiments to make this silicon actually work the way she expected it to. She had no choice. She was going to have to do the material science work herself. Well, this is crazy if you think about it. Here she was a fine arts major. Up to this point, she had no experience in business, even less experience in the sciences. She may have taken a high school chemistry class, but she'd forgotten all of it. That this was not stopping her. She was now taking the biggest divergence of her life and would end up spending the next 2 years in a lab testing different variations on the recipe for this silicon. As it turned out, she ended up creating a kind of silicon that didn't exist, and she got a patent for it. And this was an amazing thing. The problem was that the way that you market this kind of product is by doing a deal with a big multinational company who could take it to market, right? And get it into all the local stores and all the stuff that she didn't know anything about. So obviously she needed to do a deal with a big company. And she'd walk into these meetings and she would tell them about her big vision. She was gonna get people to embrace repairing their stuff rather than replacing it. But you can imagine the response she got, right? These guys did not care about her big vision of changing how people consume products. And it was a very different response than she was getting from her friends and from people in the design community who were just foaming at the mouth to get at this new product. And finally one day somebody told her, you should just release it yourself. Do it small, take it step by step, and do it your way. That's what she did. And she sold it, they ended up selling out their entire product line the first day it was out, getting listed in Wired and Boing Boing and many major media sources, and then she was rolling. What happened there? Okay. There's one more part to the story, which is that, so you can see how at each of these points, she was taken by unexpected events, and she was able to make use of them. And she was able to make use of them with these various skills, the skills of preparation, which was how she was able to make connections between things that were not obviously connected, the skills of divergence, being able to take paths that were different than the ones that were intended, the skills of commitment we talked about. Each of these things she created structures around her that reinforced them over time. So once she had a product out in the market, she thought long and hard about how she could keep this approach to discovery a part of the business. That even as she learned more and more about what customers wanted, she wouldn't lose sight of all the things that she didn't yet know. So she built a community into her product experience. And front and center of her brand and of her marketing are her customers, how they're using the products. And now she spends a huge portion of her time engaging with those customers and pulling them in to help them define what kinds of uses they're going to be using and how they're going to engage with new channels. What ways how should they be telling this story to the world? A lot of these ideas are coming from her customers. So she's continuing day after day after day to build her business on serendipity, on those things that she couldn't have expected. So I'd like to end, before we go to Q&A, on the subject of metrics. Because we have the opportunity in a modern business to have tight feedback loops around our data. Data is incredibly important, right? It's never before have we been able to create a dashboard, a real-time dashboard of what's happening now. Now, this is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, that's the real-time data allows us to feel connected to what's happening. On the other hand, the way that we're looking at that data is through metrics that we define ahead of time, based on what we know what we believe is important. So, for instance, in Get Satisfaction, we believed what was important in the early days was a high number of consumer page views, like end users coming to the site and viewing pages. That was a common metric. Why wouldn't this apply to us? What we found after about a year and a half was that this had been distracting us from far more important metrics, such as engagement, but more importantly, our business turned out to be less about consumers and more about companies paying us. And so the company engagement, rather than end user engagement, was the #1 metric for us in building our business to where it is today. So the problem with metrics is that we have to assume when we build them that we know what's important. So when we talk about serendipity and building a kind of organizational skill around serendipity, we have to look at metrics a little differently. One way we do this is by having an overall success metric that is at a high level. So Jane, for instance, had a success metric when she set out to find this magic space-age rubber that was commercial ready. She knew what its properties had to be. She knew it had to have a shelf life of at least 6 months. She knew that it had to work on a dozen important surfaces. And unless it met those criteria, she couldn't launch it. But here's the thing. She didn't know how to get there. Just like when JFK set out a goal to getting a man on the moon by the end of the decade, of the 60s, he and his science advisors didn't know exactly how to do that either. So one way we can deal with metrics is by setting a goal which has very specific success criteria that are far enough out but specific. And so that there's opportunity to use serendipity, use the unplanned discovery between here and there. More close to home, we can look at metrics around the kind of behaviors that allow us to take advantage of the unexpected. So, for instance, when we talk about divergence, right, which again is how we take paths that are different than the ones we intend, we know that unless we create a function for making small bets, we probably won't take them. Once we find the mainstream of our business, unless we find ways to make small bets along the way, we're not going to be in a position to diverge when the opportunities arise. So we find companies, great and small. Google's 20% time, which many of you have heard of. Google has a program primarily for its engineers and product people, which grants them 20% of their time to pursue projects which are not directly related to their core focus. Okay. This actually has been used at 3M for many years. 3M, which is famous for inventing the Post-it note on the basis of serendipity, although it took them a decade. So there are specific behaviors that we can encourage through structure and then create metrics around them to make sure that the behaviors that we ourselves and those around us have are allowing space for us to take advantage of those unexpected opportunities. So those are two specific examples of how we can use metrics alongside the very rigorous metrics that we use. By the way, the other approach we can take with metrics is we can look at them instead of success criteria. In other words, if we don't hit this metric, we are not successful. That's the typical way of thinking about metrics. You need those. But you also need metrics, you need disposable metrics, those things which are really just a measure of a hypothesis which you're okay with disproving. This is the thing which is so wonderful about science. Science is okay with being wrong, right? It's what distinguishes it from so many other kinds of thinking. And so in our businesses, if we find that we are not okay with being wrong, then we end up with a dogmatic institution. So metrics is one way, by explicitly developing metrics that are disposable, that allow us to be wrong, then we can encourage that kind of culture that allows for productive failure. So, those are some of the highlights from our concepts around planned serendipity. There's much more to it, of course. The book is on sale right now, and we're open to taking some questions from the audience. How are we doing on time? Good. Okay.
Let's give away 3 more books.
Sorry?
Let's do some more books.
How many do we have? Oh, okay, great. So, ask a question, get a book. Okay.
All right, so you have a new business, launching it. You have very few customers, but you want to actually grow your customer base, and you want to give people feedback. And some of the feedback is like, hey, here's user-derived content and things of that nature. Very little content to begin with, but people need to find it and search on it. You only have 10 things, whatever. How do you proceed to essentially kind of work with that small community in such a way that other people want to flock as far as the way you interact with that customer base?
Okay, so if I can paraphrase, tell me if I'm right. You have a company and you want to engage with your customers, but you need to bootstrap that conversation.
Essentially.
Right, okay. This is a great question, by the way. I think every company who's launching wonders this. I guess the number one way is confuse your customers and give them a way to ask questions. That was a joke. But that's actually, most companies don't need help doing that. There's an interesting aspect of launching a customer community alongside your product, which is that if people are asking questions, if they're reporting problems, then you're off to a good start, right? Because they actually care. If they aren't, then you may have a bigger problem, right? So that's number one, is make sure that you're launching in a way where they can communicate, right? So the way we have built this in our products, we've built little widgets which are designed to be anywhere that your customers are. because we realize that most customers won't seek out a forum. So for a traditional forum, you need to be pretty motivated. So what we try to do, and one of the best practices, is be wherever your customers are, so that you're ready for them wherever they unexpectedly have an accident, whenever they unexpectedly trip up. And then make it really warm and fuzzy for them to do that. The other thing is just be as open with your communications as possible. Any communication can be fodder for engagement. And rather than it being just a static communication, allow people to respond to it. So be where your customers are. Increasingly people expect to be able to have a conversation wherever. And so I think that living up to that is one great way. So next, right there. Yeah.
How do you have like a balance, let's say, at a company to allow people to be creative and do things that are outside the norm, but also be able to meet their responsibilities to the customer?
Right. So we wrote a whole book about that. But I will give you a couple of examples. So number one, I think about this in two ways: culture and structure. So you need to have a culture where that's valued. In a lot of cultures, people is communicated one way or another that the only thing that matters is the result relative to the plan. Okay. That's problematic from the standpoint that I've been talking about. Okay. So the cultures that do well are those that hire people who have other interests other than that specific product. Okay. Find people who are obsessed by something, and you can get this out of them in the interview process. The other thing, you have employees already. You can encourage them to develop interest or invest in their own interests that are outside of your specific domain. Because that, I didn't talk about it, but there's this notion in psychology called construal level theory, or CLT. And the idea is that we have different modes of thinking. That we have concrete modes of thinking, where very, very tactical, very task-based kind of thinking exists here. You're trying to, optimize your hard drive. You're kind of in concrete thinking mode. Then there's abstract thinking. And in reality, there's kind of a continuum, but it's helpful to think about them as two modes. Abstract thinking is one where you don't see hard divisions between categories of ideas. And so when you're in abstract thinking, you're able to connect ideas across them. So by encouraging people to have these other interests, much like Jane had the interest in sculpture, you're allowing them the mental freedom to start making those connections. And what's interesting is that once upon a time, there were only a small number of people who were in interaction-based jobs. Most people in the industrial age were in very task-based jobs. So you could prescribe everything. But most of the jobs are going into an interaction-based model. So that's culture. Structure, I think actually one way is to embed this, as I just said, in the hiring process. So many other ideas, but you get a book so you can look them up.
I was going to ask, how do you go about embedding that into the hiring process? Because it is so cultural.
Yeah.
What you're talking about are taught terms, a lot of terms that come out of, like, say, improvisational theater mode, and into people who are doing manufacturing or coming out of other results-oriented solutions. So I just wonder how do you do that? How do you get change?
Okay, so changing culture is a tricky one. And no, honestly, so here's my belief about culture. I believe that all culture, every group has a culture already, and that culture has a good side and a bad side. Every culture. And so in the structures we add to it can either emphasize the bad side. The Nazis emphasized the bad side of the German culture. I have some German in me, so I can say that. But the Germans are wonderful people. I love flying Lufthansa. It's a great airline. And anyway, so the trick is how do we bring out the good side of the culture we're a part of? And I think that the best example I have of this is what Tony Hsieh did at Zappos. A couple years into building Zappos, the great online shoe store, he realized that they needed to get more structured about how they built their culture as they grew, because they were a few hundred people. He knew they were going to go to a few thousand people. And so what he didn't do was tell people what the culture was. Right? What he did do was create activities where people were able to tell him what they thought the culture was. Okay? And then as a CEO and as a management team, they looked at what they came up with, what all the employees came up with, and they distilled them down. They were like curators. They were helping to optimize the experience that these people naturally wanted as they revealed in this exercise. And then, so they have some great values. If you go to their website, they have their values plastered everywhere. But one of those values is be a little bit weird. And so that sounds like a funny one, but that was again, that came from bottom up. People, they liked each other a lot, and what they liked about each other was not that they were uniform, but that they were different. And that was what enabled them to have these amazing conversations with their customers on the phones, right? And so they created a whole program, a whole part of the hiring process around this. So they ask, the simplest example, this is a question they ask, which is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how weird are you? Right? Here's the thing, is they don't actually hire the people who say 10. Nor do they hire the people who say answer 1, 2, or 3. They probably have changed this up since, because you can game it now, because everybody knows about it. But that's an example, right? From an exercise that's bottom up and top down, meet in the middle, to a structure which is repeatable, and it works well. Obviously, you can't be too prescriptive about this, but we can look at the patterns that work. All right. Yeah. Hello.
Hi. So I'm glad you mentioned the weird scale. So when I went to Zappos, I saw that on the wall.
Yeah.
It's awesome. So I have a question about sparking creativity. Can you suggest some exercises for people that they could do, on a weekly or monthly basis? And would you say that doing tangible exercises are more valuable than like visualization, or what have you seen in terms of people being able to let go of these constructs that they have, which tell them don't do that, that's too risky?
Yeah. So I'll pick one example. Somebody mentioned improvisation. Now this seems really weird to some people, okay? But I know a company in Phoenix, Arizona, not by any means some weird hippie liberal California town like the one I grew up in, Santa Cruz, but Phoenix, right? It's a modern cosmopolitan city, but kind of conservative. It's an agency, creative agency called 40, and they start every morning off with an improv exercise. And the exercise will change from day to day. They say that if they don't do this exercise, that the rest of the day is affected by it. Now the reason why is because the improv they do, and there are actually consultants now, improv for business consultants, it's kind of funny. Improv is based on a concept of exchange, right? Of people, one person in general, I'm distilling this into simpleton form, but one person making an offer to somebody else, the offer being, it could be a suggestion, it could be whatever the exercise is about, but you're putting something out there. And the other person, who is the receiver, they have to do something with that, okay? And there's one key rule, which is yes and. They have to do something which supports the other person, no matter how crazy it is. And they can redirect it in some other, or extend it in some interesting new area, but they can't say no, they can't shut it down. And so for a creative agency, what this does is it changes their mental model, right? From one of primarily critique, which is a natural place to be for a creative or an engineering perspective. Critique it, find what's wrong with it, right? Which is important in a lot of ways, but as a basis, it shuts people down. So by approaching the interactions with each other from this yes and model, they're creating a new foundation. That foundation is one of support and safety. It's safe here to communicate our ideas. And then from there, they can layer on other approaches throughout the day. So we have to hack our own brains. Right? Again, our brains, we know more and more just how faulty they are. Well, how faulty they are under certain circumstances. And because, well, I'll leave it there. And improv is one way that we've seen teams actually hack their own brains to create a different space. Good?
Cool. So, yep. Thank you. So we have more boxes of these books to give away. Thor said that he would autograph them. He hasn't done that yet, so we could be like the first area that he autographs. That'd be cool. So if you guys want a copy, I'm going to go get the boxes and bring them up. And we'll just have them right here, and you can take it. If you have any other questions for Thor, he'll be around and you can talk to them. In about 5 minutes, Drew Onvarsky is going to do his presentation in the other room, and then at 6 o'clock tonight, the pitches will begin.
Thanks.